the streets and in the hills above the South Bay, there is a different chase. A state fish and game warden who was shot during a raid on a pot farm is now telling his story for the very first time. His ordeal is part of a growing concern over hidden drug dens.
You know, it's just, I'll never forget every minute, every second, how visceral that incident was, because it was the first time I had been in a gunfight. More importantly, it was the first time we'd ever had somebody hurt. You know, the helplessness of knowing that if he doesn't get rescued soon, there's nothing more we can do. He's gonna die of blood loss, go into shock, and he was starting to show those signs. It's the Wild West. You would not think you're in California, right? And all of these folks now are surrounded by 10,000 or even more than 10,000 illegal grow sites, primarily Chinese and Hmong, some Mexican cartels. But then we would run into a handful of them that were in a really, what do I call a really aggro cell, aggressive. And we had a west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley, man, literally looking up to the west at the mountains above Meta headquarters and Cisco and eBay, no joke, where we had multiple gunfights. And you're looking at those mountains, and those are some of the most violent and vicious operators from the cartels that I'd ever run into.
You know, giving some of the viewers the background that, you know, may not be really familiar, can you maybe just kind of go through a macro idea of, you know, your background and what hidden war kind of is definitionally?
Yeah, I grew up right in the Silicon Valley, the suburbs of kind of the southern area of the Silicon Valley, where you have cattle ranches and hunting ranches and state parks and lots of wildlife. Kind of oxymoronic to think of the Silicon Valley having that, but that's where I was born and raised. My family's all settled in northwestern Montana, and after doing close to 30 years as a fish and game warden, my dream job, settled in Montana now, where I'm at full time, still in California quite a bit, about probably 40% of the year, and then all over this country now doing what we're going to talk about today, which was something I never really anticipated going that direction, but things kind of blew up. And, you know, being a man of faith, I think there's a little divine intervention halfway through the career, and we'll talk about some of those things. But essentially became a game warden, and, you know, most people have a general concept of what a game warden does. I know game wardens in Texas are a big part of your state here. I mean, they're a huge agency. They're a fantastic agency. I work with game wardens here a lot. But we do a lot more than just check your hunting license, check your fishing license, and make sure you don't take too many fish or the wrong size, or, you know, a deer out of season. There's so much more, you know, that the job entails. And I spent 28 and a half years doing all those things, but then discovered my first Sinaloa cartel marijuana cannabis grow, you know, in a stone's throw from where I grew up learning to backpack in my home area back in 2004. And that, unbeknownst to me, would be this like hard pivotal turn to focus on a whole nother level of environmental crime that foreign, you know, basically eco-terrorists, the drug cartels, were now embedded in California. And unbeknownst to me, they were embedded in the rest of the country as well, doing that very crime. And now, of course, it's morphed into everything that's a priority of this new administration that I'm sure we're going to dive into, of what the cartels really mean as a threat to America, and how powerful and how wealthy and how efficient they are in every state of the union, including where we're sitting here in Dallas, Texas. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I did. And it led to a second book deal right when I retired in 2018. I had no idea Hidden War, the first edition, which is my latest book, would get the attention it did. And from people like Steven Ranella, very grateful for Meat Eater, and my friends over at Meat Eater. Joe Rogan got a hold of it. Meat Eater really wanted it in his hands, and he just blew up with it. You know, basically, how do I not know about this? This is crazy. I'm a cannabis guy. I'm an elk hunter, and cartels, and you're fighting them as game wardens.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Silicon Valley foothills, what the F is going on with that?
Well, that's what the Hidden War is a perfect name for it, because it's precisely that. I mean, even people that I've mentioned in passing that I'm having you on that maybe weren't familiar with the work, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's essentially a task force or a special forces team that's looking to break down cartels. And they're like, oh, in Mexico. I'm like, no, in the U.S. And they're like, in the U.S.?
Where?
Like
what?
at the border?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's in California, Silicon Valley, right there. It's all over the country. Yeah. You know, I know in Julian's show, he was like, that wouldn't happen in New Jersey. And Julian, I love you, but it probably would happen in Jersey, in North Jersey, where I grew up, you know, deep woods and stuff there. I know people were cooking up meth. It wouldn't surprise me if it's happening, you know, pretty much in every state.
It really is, man. And it's one of those things that wherever the cartels can make money, wherever they can get a market, whether it's toxically tainted cannabis, and I'll talk about when I use that term toxically tainted, the poisons they put on this stuff to keep things off of it in grow sites that, you know, basically dries invisible on the plant. And then it gets harvested, it gets dried, and it goes out to consumers. All that, you know, good weed we grow in California, because we're known for good wine and good weed. You know, California is the weed state of really, I think, the world. Yep. So much of that comes back east into the black market for, you know, kids, medicinal patients, recreational users. So what, 44 million Americans approximately, you know, have some sort of recreational medical consumption of cannabis. And now we're dealing with stuff that's got like nerve agents on it, poisons that are so deadly, insecticides that are so deadly. They're felonies to possess in America now. We can't use them on our own crops. EPA determined 20 plus years ago that this stuff that was created for like farm and agriculture is nasty. You know, active ingredients are like nerve agents, some of the actual chemicals that the Nazis developed for their chemical warfare program way back in World War II. That's how nasty this stuff is. I mean, and when you see what it does to wildlife, mountain lions ingesting, you know, just a couple drops of this stuff at the bottom of a plant in water, puncturing a water line in a drought to drink on a hot summer day, and the water's tainted inside the line. And I have pictures, a lot of color pictures in this new second edition that's behind me here. This is the second edition of Hidden War. I had to, we sold out of the first edition several years ago. We had to do a second edition, and what I did is I updated the currency of COVID hadn't happened when I wrote the first book. National pandemics and lockdowns, Reed, hadn't happened. And what did the cartels do when the world shut down and everyone went to lockdown and we were in fear of everything we didn't understand? They went, Disneyland free tickets, every ride's free, there's no lines, let's go. Yep. I mean, these cartels work in a culture of chaos, especially from what they've dealt with in Mexico, how brutal it is, how much they're constantly at war with each other, how they're constantly at war with the federales, with the Mexican authority, police. And so they knew that we would be basically hamstrung and crippled. And they went on steroids, not only on the weed trade, but that fentanyl started to blow up. Super meth, the new P2P super methamphetamine trafficking and cooks and distribution throughout the country just went haywire. And human and child sex trafficking just started to explode. And we didn't see that coming. And I've only been out of, operational agency life of 30 years, about less than a year. And boom, we're having lockdowns. And then the new administration comes in, right, in 2020. And all this hard border protection that President Trump's first term was focused on. Steel was down on the southern border here, right in Southwest Texas. And right after I retired, I remembered we did the pilot film for my Thin Green Line film series. It's on my YouTube channel with Recoil TV. And just so everybody kind of knows, the publishing brand I work with, so my book is published by Caribou, which is the book division of Gun Digest, the magazine. And Recoil Magazine, Recoil Off Grid, Blade, all those different magazines and publishing group are all one entity. And I'm really blessed to be part of that group because they're wired right. They're wired for, legitimate Second Amendment principles, conservation, wildlife conservation, protecting our wildlife species, and public safety. So when I was down on the Southwest border now, and I've only, been retired a couple of months, and we're down there hunting on the Texas and Mexico border out of Calendaria, Texas. And I had no idea how thriving the cartel was right on that border. And as we're, couple of, retired snipers, me and one of my partners, one of my Delta team members, Marcos, as he's call signed in the book, we're down there hunting out ad rams and long range shooting specifically, and the ethics of being long range shooters on a 50,000 acre beautiful ranch. I mean, I never thought there were Grand Canyon like canyons in the state of Texas, but brother, this ranch had it. And at the same time we're hunting this, the outfitters are telling us about, we have cartel border crossings all the time. We have coyotes, smuggling people, drugs, everything, right? They'd had a shootout with one of them where the outfitter's son, who's also a guide and a long range competitor, actually took a bullet during that gunfight with cartel people that came into the ranch house area in the property, and a gunfight ensued, and he still has a piece of bullet lodged behind his heart that'll never come out.
Jesus Christ.
And Walker Doherty, who just, what a great young man, just by the graces of the man above, man, survived that. Dude, it was nuts. And we're hearing these stories. And we're hearing when you get to the little Catholic church there with the little dim light right there, we're going to come meet you guys. Don't try to get there before dark and stay under the light. I'm like, what is going on? You know, I don't have a kit anymore. I know the cartel's close. And the outfitters rolled in side by sides with tactical gear and assault rifles. And because they knew that whole ranch was a trafficking corridor, you know, in that little tiny remote county. And then while we were on the ranch doing the hunt, and I talk about it in the book, and there's some actual pictures, we're off on one side triggering, you know, ground sensors and cameras with big long range rifles in our backpacks, all camouflaged out. So Border Patrol are getting those images in real time going, oh my gosh, we have sicarios like working through the ranch. Well, meantime, 50,000 acres is huge.
Yeah.
While we're on this hunt stalking 2 really nice rams and talking about conservation and ethics, they're on ATVs with a helicopter overwatch, running down like 15 smugglers with 100-pound bags of tainted weed, processed. They had some other narcotics. I'm not sure if they had fentanyl at the time, but there was meth involved, and they were trafficking people, and we were finding the caves with all the graffiti, the waypoints through the ranch that look just like grow in, you know, encampments that are hidden and camouflaged in like the California Silicon Valley foothills. And I went, this is the first time I've been down on the southern border. I mean, I've worked the cartel problem, you know, home where I grew up on an environmental component, and that kind of forced us game wardens into it. But I hadn't seen it at ground zero, man. And when a Border Patrol chopper pilot landed right on top of us and realized we weren't cartel runners, and we met, and he said, yeah, I've heard of you and I've heard of your book, man. This is crazy, but we can't talk about it. But just little Alpine County down here in Alpine County, Texas, he goes, the numbers are ridiculous, what we're finding. And spread the word if you can. It's everywhere.
And numbers in terms of like individual crossing?
Yeah,
like
crossings, you know, tons and tons and tons of narcotics coming across the border, whether it be methamphetamine or fentanyl and the weed, you know, that's coming from Mexico because it's produced there as well as within our country. So they're kind of, you know, they're basically doubling down because they know some of it's going to get interdicted. And that was a real eye opener. And then I think 2-3 weeks after that hunt and filming that pilot film for my channel, lockdown started and the pandemic hit. And that was a big shift. And so long-windedly, this new second edition updates and goes into the changes and the shift of what the cartels did then and what we've seen from the outreach component. I mean, obviously, I hadn't done podcasts yet. You know, I hadn't got the message out on, you know, guys like you being part of the thin green line, being a force multiplier to help spread the word. And now we're into about our 4th printing of that. My friend Jack Carr was gracious enough to write the foreword for this second book, and he just crushed it because he is a diehard conservationist as well, and a heck of a, you know, retired Navy Special Warfare SEAL operator. But he loves wildlife too, and even he was blown away. And he said, I knew it was bad. I did not know it was that bad till I read Hidden War. And his daughters read Hidden War as well, and we're just like, wow, this is crazy. So Jack was really instrumental in helping push the message and part of that fight.
Can you detail the general impact that these drugs, I mean, you know, I want to dive into kind of your early career and when everything kind of came to a head in 2004, but can you detail a little bit further on the impact that these have on just the environment in general? Because so many would think that, you know, you're just growing weed and sure, there might be some chemicals and whatever, but I mean, as you were highlighting, there's some very vicious chemicals, but not only that, it's just the wrong chemicals used in the wrong area can have massive impacts on the ecosystem there. Yeah. And especially when there's no care in terms of, you know, how it's being implemented and how industrial it actually is. So can you dive into that a little further and just what the impact was you were seeing?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you're bringing it up. You know, when you think of the illegal weed trade in California, you think, okay, these are like Vietnam era hippies. They're up in Humboldt County, you know, they're in the Emerald Triangle. They're growing a couple hundred plants. It's kind of a Cheech and Chong thing. They just want to be left alone. They're making a little money, black market. They don't have to, pay taxes on. You don't think of, organized crime groups in battle dress uniforms with AK-47 rifles and other type of weapons from Mexico, from Sinaloa and other cartels, embedded in these farms, and then bringing up these EPA-banned neurotoxins like Furadan, Metaphos, Q-Furan. Those are just some of the trade names. And there's pictures, descriptions, and graphic color ones in the book so people can understand what these are, because you don't know when you could run across one of these. We're finding this on private land grows now that are run by the cartels all over California and Maine and Michigan and you name it. It's just blown up in the states that have regulated. But that stuff gets into the water because obviously they got to taint the plants. They don't want anything on the plants. Many times they'll put that chemical in these check dams or in doughboy swimming pools outside of an indoor grow site with these big hoop houses, say in Northern California, and they'll pump the water poison directly to the grow site. They'll take tuna cans and just where you have a little bit of leftover tuna oil inside the can, put a couple drops of carbofuran and put them out as little animal attractants. So if a black bear or a mountain lion or a black-tailed deer, let's say, walks up into the grow site and they may want to eat on part of the bud, which obviously is going to lose profit for these growers, they'll go ahead and they'll suck up that oil in the tuna can. They'll ingest some of the poison, and within 20 minutes, their body's having a central nervous reaction shutdown. They're frothing at the mouth. Their blood is being actually thinned because there's anticoagulants, and then there's a neurotoxin, a nerve agent, essentially. So they die a very violent death. And pretty much we say that anything that contacts that poison isn't going to do damage to the cash crop they're trying to protect because of how deadly it is and how potent it is and how fast acting it is. So you have that element, right? And then imagine that you get a couple tablespoons of this stuff in a creek that flows past the grow site. And a lot of these grows, even on private land, are on pristine creeks because they're in rural areas, or they go right into the underground aquifer when these illegal wells are dug.
Exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, so it's not only surface water we're dealing with, but the real big push now, like in private land, and my friend Jorge Ventura, who's a News Nation journalist now, who's also on Julian's show, and really that was kind of the catalyst for us to connect on that show. I was up with Jorge Ventura and Sonic Basu, his producer and awesome cinematographer. And when he was with Daily Caller, we were doing the Narcotics documentary up in Siskiyou County. And this was 3 years after I had operationally retired. And I had worked with all those Siskiyou County deputies when I was the Met team leader for our marijuana enforcement team, our specialized tactical unit in California, Fish and Wildlife. But I hadn't done raids when I, retired. I did this. I educated. Now I can speak freely. I'm not under gag orders from California. I can talk nationally. So I integrated with Jorge. We did a bunch of content, a bunch of interviews, and then we went on a raid day with Siskiyou County Sheriff on that Friday, and we did 4 search warrants and arrest warrants if we found what we needed. And it was mind-blowing to see the magnitude of what had blown up in that county in just 3 or 4 years that I was out of operations, and the amount of water destruction. So California at the time is in their second largest drought in history. We were on water rationing, ranchers, farmers, old, World War II era veteran families that moved to pristine Siskiyou County with Mount Shasta in the background, one of the 7 natural wonders, glacier ice on it at 14,000 feet. And I mean, it's the Wild West. You would not think you're in California, right? And all of these folks now are surrounded by 10,000 or even more than 10,000 illegal grow sites, primarily Chinese and Hmong, some Mexican cartels that have just come in, bought that land, and now they're just sucking all the water underground dry. They're putting illegal wells in. They're using not only the carbofuran and the stuff the Mexican cartels use, but we started to see just within the last couple of years, Chinese chemicals with Chinese monikers on them from mainland China, 7 different chemicals, some antifungals, some rodenticides that are just as deadly. And now what they're doing, Reed, which is just absolutely sinister, is they're putting that chemical in an empty paint can and they're burning it and creating a smoke aeration, if you will, while they're in Tyvek suits and they have the fitted N95, respirator masks, the same ones we're fitted for to go into these grow sites because it's a hazmat when you run across these poisons. I mean, you can blindness, respiratory failure, death if you don't get in and out of that thing quick or if you're exposed to it. And now they're burning this stuff like a smoke and it's going everywhere. It's seeping into the plants. It's on all the equipment. It's in the waterways. People downstream, downwind that live in the community, they're breathing it in. They're going to the ER with nausea and headaches and migraines, not knowing what's going on. Is it connected to this poison? Most likely. So that's the environmental impact. And when a couple tablespoons of, say, carbofuran, that's like crystal powder, you put it in a small tributary, a creek, that has migrating steelhead trout in it, a threatened endangered fish that's worth about $40,000 a fish at the federal level. If you were to put a monetary value, they're so rare now. You're talking 2 to 5 miles of creek destroyed. Every aquatic in that thing is dead, for a long time to come. And that's what we started to see in California. I went, what is going on in this creek, man? What caused this much damage? So the environmental impacts are exponential compared to somebody poaching a single deer. Somebody, diverting a waterway and drying out a stream and killing some things downstream, which is wrong because they're, they need it for agriculture. They need it for cattle. Maybe they're taking water illegally. They're doing a development that isn't done properly when they're building buildings or homes. But a cartel grow and the water destruction and just every day, it's a constant, what we call a Superfund site of destruction, killing the 3 Ws, wildlife, waterways, and wildlands at an exponential level. And that really got a shift and, became an attention point of mine, unplanned, of course, when we first started seeing this in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I wanted to highlight too, is because I don't think people, again, even if they hear the impact, they might even think just a dead animal or even one river, whatever. But when you really start to look at it, it's these escalating factors as they build on top of each other. You were saying, God forbid one of those underwater wells, or it's connected to a well and all of a sudden it's in drinking water or, and it gets, utilized for on a farm and all the animals start ingesting it and that goes out to people. Or there's just so many different compounding factors that it can quickly have such a detriment on a society. And also you ignore it for long enough and you end up with, dead forests and dead areas, and it completely changes the agriculture and completely changes, the whole economy in an area. And it's just, I think it was just so profound reading that and hearing how detrimental the impact is. Cause I also don't think people ever have that second level thinking of just how much it can compound and how quickly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's an exponential thing because you have the impacts to the ground, right? You have the impacts to water, like we just talked about. The rough, and this is just an approximation, but for an outdoor cartel grow, private or public land in general, somewhere between 5 and 8 gallons of water per day are going to be needed for each plant till they're harvested. And that's an illegal grow. So that water is not, that's stolen water, just like it's a stolen crop or it's a stolen, income from, say, a legitimate regulated grower in California. And I'll use my old home state as a regulated state now. Basically in 2016, we regulated under Prop 64. We knew it was coming. A big portion of my job as a lieutenant and the team leader of the marijuana enforcement team was to do outreach and education. So I would do PowerPoint presentations and just speeches and talks to legislatures, conservation groups, animal rights groups, kids in high school at assemblies, you name it, all over the board. And I told everybody, including lobbyists and, governor's office staffers at the time, I said, we know regulations coming, man. And it could be effective in stopping the black market. That's the big selling point of regulating cannabis, right? Stop the black market, make it an organic product, make it affordable, et cetera. We don't want EPA ban toxics on our cannabis that our kids are trying out in high school or whatever and beyond. And I said, but when you regulate, guys, you got to keep the bite in crime. You got to keep the penalties for an outdoor trespass grower from the Sinaloa cartel or some greenhouse grower up north, whatever ethnicity. You got to keep it a felony, and go after it, because with the water stealing and the environmental destruction going on, you have so many compounded multi-level exponential crimes that aren't just, it's illegal, so it's a crime, we're going to bust this guy for weed. Well, it's not even a weed issue anymore, right? Take the weed out of it. Just take the whole equation, oh, that's so 80s, just say no, right? People thinking, this is marijuana, man. Come on. I mean, it's legal. It should have been legal 20 years ago. You're like, yeah, I don't disagree with that, but it needs to be legalized the right way. Mm-hmm. And we did it the wrong way in California. When we made it a misdemeanor for a cartel grower to have an illegal farm indoors or outdoors, and an infraction for a juvenile grower, and the cartels bring their young guys up, we would see 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old grower apprentice, if you will, in these grow sites. And, they may not be savage at first, and some of them may never be savage, but then we would run into a handful of them that were in a really, what I call a really, really aggro cell, aggressive. And we had a west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley, man, literally looking up to the west at the mountains above Meta headquarters in Cisco and eBay, no joke, where we had multiple gunfights. And you're looking at those mountains, and those are some of the most violent and vicious operators from the cartels that I'd ever run into, that my teammates that we'd ever seen, that our dogs had to sometimes engage, that would fight our dogs, would target our dogs with fixed blade shanks or sharpened bones, to take those dogs out. Very aggressive. And they bring up their juvenile guys, and their juvenile guys have a automatic pistol on their side. Maybe they have a semi-automatic rifle. Maybe they're going to fight just like, their dad or their cousin or someone they're, being mentored under. And it's a culture of violence and chaos. So they're going to get credibility by being tough. Mm-hmm. So we knew we were going to see that. We had already seen it, but at least we had a felony statute. At least we could work with ICE agents. Very, very few of these growers were citizens of the U.S. I mean, I can't remember, maybe a handful at the most. So 90 plus of the people were engaging in these grow sites are all cartel operatives, smuggled across the border, cutting their teeth, making a living doing it down there effectively, learning to divert water, learning to camouflage the grow, learning to harvest, learning to defend it, learning to camouflage it, all of those things. And then now they're in my backyard, they're in your backyard, they're kind of spread out everywhere. And now we make it a misdemeanor, and we know nobody's going to jail. We're told we can't talk to ICE, we can't talk to Border Patrol as a state agency, as game wardens who were federally deputized as well. So we have federal authority under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and under policy, we will support federal law enforcement agencies that ask for help. And that's what we're supposed to do. And when now you're not working with federal agencies because of a mandate, from the governor's office on down in California, and it's a misdemeanor, nobody's going to touch that. You're going to eradicate the grow. You're not going to arrest anybody 9 times out of 10. Those guys are going to be in the wind. They're going to be protected. They're not even going to get deported anymore. And now they're just going to be in another grow site. Maybe they're going to be on a meth cook in the winter. Maybe they're trafficking children. Because what we got to understand is it's not just a green dope crime. These are polycriminals. They're like a good way of putting it is like take a really good general contractor and all of his subcontractors to build a nice home, right? The complex we're sitting in today. One guy, he's the concrete guy. He's building the foundation. This guy's going to frame, right? Then this guy's going to come in and sheetrock and electrical and plumbing, and you're going to have all these diversity. That's exactly how they work. They're all part of the same group. They're all centralized and they're working for certain people, but one guy is trafficking fentanyl. Dirty labs, down in Mexico, distribution, hitting the West Coast, East Coast, wherever it's coming in. And that distribution center is locked down. It's very efficient. It's successful exponentially. We're talking billions, not millions, but billions of cash dollars. Another guy's doing the weed trade. This guy's doing meth. This guy's trafficking humans for work. This guy's trafficking children for the ugliest stuff we see, across the world. So we were on the tip of the iceberg when we were fighting the weed fight, which we still are. And for me being a conservationist, and, the saying we have in my family, my dad, my grandpa's saying is, the woods are my church. I grew up, learning to hunt at 9 years old. And it wasn't about, oh, you kill animals, so you hate animals. Exactly the opposite. Under the conservation model, if you harvest waterfowl, or big game to consume, to feed your family with good meat. You do it humanely, you do it with ethics, you do it with gratitude. You fish and eat those fish, and you stay within those limits. And all that money and all that time we put into protecting those animals through ethical harvest, it sounds contradictory, but it's exactly the opposite, right?
It's a natural ecosystem.
Natural ecosystem. And now that we've got all these impacts on wildlife, cartels, development, just our population exploding, and open spaces and green belts going like this, we're the problem of destroying wildlife. We have no choice but to manage it now under the conservation model, or species will go extinct. They will die of starvation. It'll upset the predator, non-predator balance, plains game, all those different things. That's what the impacts were on the environmental side. And that's what really got me strongly passionate to fight these guys. We had no idea that fentanyl was a thing. We had no idea that these same growers were part of meth cooks, and I go into that in the book, of seeing how closely knitted they are and getting to debrief in interviews of a high-level plaza boss that was picked up for a 22-pound meth cook in the winter, but responsible for 50 or more grow sites of weed out in the national forest in Northern California. And now he's going to talk freely, provided, he might have a little bit of leniency. And he was very forthright. And I got to sit in and be part of that interview with the feds and Spanish interpreters and videotaping and the sheriffs and everything we needed to find out. He was very forthright in revealing. And we were right on a lot of stuff. But what I didn't realize is the magnitude of how embedded they were. And this is going back to we're talking 2012, 2011, and it's escalated exponentially since then, as you know. And I did not know how embedded it was. And I'm taking this, say my hometown of Silicon Valley is just a bullet point example for every state in the union, and every region, rural or urban, has that presence of cartel crimes and cartel products in every state. And when this guy is just laughing when I'm talking about, well, how do you get them across the border? How hard is it with border patrol? And, he goes, he laughed and said, we don't consider that border a border. That's just the division between Mexico North and Mexico South. And that thing you guys call the border, it's like a speed bump on the freeway. $4,000 to $7,000 out of my organization making millions gets my best growers, my best traffickers up here in 24 to 48 hours. Even if they're deported, even if they're arrested,
we're come right back.
We're going to get them right back. And these are the guys that aren't just minions. These are the guys that are vetted. Really good growers. They know how to divert water. They've done it under the Federales and Mexican military's nose, say in Sinaloa Highlands. They've grown weed. They've used the poisons on it to keep everything off it. They've got it dried and processed and been able to distribute it out of Mexico. Then those guys they're the tier one guys, and they'll bring them across the border. And it was all California at the time, and now it's gone many other places. But we were right there next to the, San Diego southern border. No brainer.
Yeah.
And California is one of only 6 true Mediterranean climates on the globe. So we are the ideal outdoor sunshine state to grow the best cannabis on the planet. And so the cartel started there.
I have a plethora of questions with that.
Yeah, I threw you a lot.
No. I mean, there's just so many interesting points. I do want to come back to how California itself as a state was kind of handling it, but right off of here, because you're mentioning it, what is the interaction of the different cartels in terms of what you've seen? Because, everyone knows that Tijuana is a constant hotspot for cartel warfare because it's such a perfect crossing spot. Even down when you look south of the border right here, Juarez is a massive spot where they're constantly battling who can get supremacy. I would look at California, as you just mentioned, being one of the only Mediterranean climates, and there's up and down the state, so many perfect places to grow or cook or do anything. Is there consistent infighting or anything like that as well between competitive cartels, or are they kind of...
There's some, much less than you're going to see in actual Mexico. And here's why. Once they get across that border, it's not advantageous to them to have a lot of infighting, because if you start having shootouts and you start having bodies disappear, somehow, some way, us on the law enforcement side are going to get wind of that. We're going to be investigating that. You're going to have eyes and ears. And even if it's really remote, you're going to have hikers and hunters and different elements of outdoor recreationalists that are going to come across that. And they don't want to draw that attention. Now, that being said, it's not to say it doesn't happen. I mean, we found dead growers in their tents that a rival competing cell, maybe from the same cartel, maybe from a rival, got too close to the line or decided to take more territory. And you have murdered, cartel growers in the grow site. We've seen them on semi-rural properties in the affluent Silicon Valley foothills, a stone's throw from where I grew up, of, AK-47 rounds in a guy that was defined as a sheep herder on this ranch who clearly wasn't just a sheep herder, and now we come to find there's a cartel boss that's an American citizen. He's hiding in plain sight. He's very affluent. He's got a real piece of property. The whole first chapter of Hidden War goes into this cartel kingpin that we worked for 15 damn years, from a murder that he was acquitted of, that was just a weird case. And now he's back at doing the cartel weed thing. And, certain growers are dying, and there's a bunch of different cartel faction growers all over his place. So we do see that. Ambushes set up, a lot of deception. What really has been the biggest liaison lately, and we're not seeing a lot of violence because it's more cooperative, is this collaboration between the Chinese crime groups and Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation actually working together. And you never thought you'd see this, but when Jorge and I and Sognick were up doing the Narcotics documentary in Siskiyou County, what had transpired since I retired and even a little bit before that, 5 years previous, I'm going to say from about 2017, 2018, 2016 on, more and more influx of Asian crime organized groups flooding Northern California and taking over the indoor private land grows in these hoop houses with these new poisons. And I'm thinking, why isn't there an issue? Where's the Sinaloa growers? I mean, they haven't given up on this because we're seeing them down in Central California. We're seeing them in Southern California. We're not seeing that, that Chinese or that Hmong element right now. And basically, the way my contacts in DEA described it, and they dropped this on me about a year ago, October, with right before I did my first of two congressional testimonies. There were two hearings in Congress that we can talk a little bit about that addressed a lot of this. Environmental impacts, cartels doing a lot of damage embedded throughout America, far north of our southern border. That was the first focus of the first hearing. It was called Protect Our Borders, Save Our Parks. I mean, I thought the congressman that put that together couldn't have named it better. And the next one was tribal, cartel impacts of tribal lands. Even in remote, last great part of the lower 48, the most remote state, my home state of Montana, and Sinaloa is right there on the Canadian border, affecting tribal groups. But I'll digress. Let's not get ahead. I'll go back to that. But long-windedly, I'm answering your question. And now the collaboration is the Chinese want the weed trade because it's a cash business. And they want a ton of currency right here in America that they can launder, that they don't have to ship back to mainland China. Idea is, in theory, and it's being investigated. I don't know how far this goes, but they want to dominate basically the currency by 2035 and run a World Bank standard under the Chinese currency structure. And they can do that by having a whole lot of cash to start now. So they want to amass a ton of cash, and they're doing it. And what they're doing is, in exchange for them getting into the weed trade, which we're seeing a lot more of, not only in California, but all the eastern states, southwestern states, but now they're going to launder Sinaloa's money for less than they were paying before. Like on average, I've been told Sinaloa, Jalisco, any of those cartels making a ton of money off all their nefarious crimes, it's all cash. And the way they launder that to legitimize it costs them about 6% on the dollar to launder. Well, the Chinese came in and said, we'll do it for 5%. And, you bleed off and we want to get involved, in NorCal, hoop houses in Siskiyou County. And we want to start amassing cash, and we're going to start trafficking our own people to work in these grow sites and stuff like that. And then as the relationship got better and more effective, it was, okay, now you're paying 4. Now you're paying 3. And now it's down to they're not paying anything. Chinese are doing it for them for 0 and supplying the precursor chemicals for fentanyl, because we know so many of them come from China. because right now, Sinaloa, Jalisco, a lot of these cartels are really making a ton of money off that fentanyl pill, that dirty pill that every, second, third one's going to kill you coming from a dirty lab. But they're making, say in downtown Dallas, Texas, San Jose, California, where I just flew in from, say Bozeman, Montana, one of the larger populated areas of a very, very small populated wilderness state, my home in Montana, about $5 a pill, right? And millions of pills can be trafficked in such a small container.
So easily. And
the addiction rate, and now, Reed, the last figure I had a couple months ago, again from my DEA friends, was 74 to 75,000 Americans a year are dying from these fentanyl overdoses from these dirty pills, and a year.
Yeah.
And I sort of do the math because I have relatives, that fought in the Vietnam War, and 10 to 12 years of conflict in Vietnam, which was a heinous war the way it was just
had someone on with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The logistics of jungle warfare and how much we didn't know about that environment and how much the VC and the NVA did. Just sharing war stories I was not privy to. I didn't experience it myself. I'm too young. But Dad and all my uncles and all the other relatives, that had an impact over there or tried to. It blows my mind. 55,000 Americans lost their lives over 12 years of an absolutely brutal war that we fought forever. And 20,000 more than that per year are dying from fentanyl in our own borders, right? And that's about, 200 people a day? So we're going to have 20 deaths or more in the duration of having this great conversation, finally meeting face to face.
Even GWAT as well. You look at GWAT.
Yeah, global war on terror.
More than GWAT.
We didn't have that many losses. Yep. No way, not even close. Over the whole duration, 20 years in Afghanistan, I don't know what the number is. I had it recently, but I'm sure we could, for those of you out there, it wasn't that much. It wasn't that many bodies, but it would be interesting to know if you can pull that up. How many we lost, in Afghanistan and Iraq during the 20-year GWAT window. But when we look at numbers like that, and you look at the precursors that those Mexican cartels need to make that deadly but super lucrative product, now you have a collaboration that's just decimating us. Because now you have all this money being laundered in Middle America for two highly efficient criminal organizations getting rich. Addiction, death, erosion, morale's dropping, depression, all these different things that they're kind of just eroding from within the country. And that's heartbreaking, man, to know how that we haven't even fired a shot in our own borders. We haven't technically gone to war and had it a military engagement against a Chinese military force or a Mexican military or a cartel, counterterrorism force or anything like that. We haven't anything like that. But how many people are dying, just a quiet hidden war death.
Yeah.
And so that's the main issue we have right here. And it's at our expense.